So hello and welcome everybody to this session titled AI We Can Trust, and specifically looking at how to build systems which are collective for global safety. So it's my real pleasure to have a great panel, very multidisciplinary, starting with Andreas Kraus, who is representing academia. Andreas is, of course, professor at ETH, but also chair of the AI Center here. Kirk is HPE fellow and also vice president and chief architect at HPE Labs. Silvio is, of course, deputy secretary general for the ISO, International Standard Organizations. And of course, last but not least, Agata Ferretti, who's AI Alliance lead for Europe and also linked with IBM. So today's session, I think, is very much about how do we build global safety. And as many of you, I think, in some of the discussions have also been seeing and hearing, today AI is, of course, advancing very, very fast. Regulations are not following and they don't have the same pace. So the problem statement really becomes, what do we do about this? And the first thing is, what is really the actual status, be it with academia, private sector, international organizations, and non-private NGOs as well. And then how do we build from there? Where do we go and how can we be, I would say, a little bit more optimistic about the future rather than maybe thinking that we can't do much about it, right? So with that in mind, I would like to start the first question to Andreas. And Andreas, tell us a little bit more about what is the status today when it comes to really even assessing some of the risks. And then we will move on from there and then to see what is really being done.
Mm-hmm. So thanks for the introduction. Of course, what do we want AI systems to be? Right? We want them to be safe, right? To be reliable, to be fair, transparent, and the likes. That's postulated in responsible AI frameworks, company internal, ethics principles, OECD, but also by law, say the EU AI Act, right? What does it mean for engineers, right? How can we go to the technical reality of AI systems? Now, I think there's different approaches to that, right? One is that's practiced in, say, controls engineering and so on, right? To design systems that can drive our nuclear power plants, fly airplanes and the likes, right? We really have a high bar in terms of formal assurances that we can provide of these systems, right? In AI, of course, the complexity we deal with is so high that this has been very hard. Because it's hard doesn't mean we shouldn't try, right? I think there is exciting basic research happening in this space, sort of trying to push the frontier of how we can make AI systems more reliable. So and others in the community and my group as well look at, for example, how can we develop reinforcement learning to be more safe, right? Kind of under some assumptions, maybe at least provide certain assurances that these systems not only come up with policies that are reliable, but also kind of learn to adapt in a feasible manner, right? Now, these don't scale to modern systems, but one needs to start somewhere. Now, what do we have for current systems that exist? Right, of course, it's primarily about assessments, tests, right, red teaming, and these kind of efforts, right? And there's a lot of work around benchmarks, evals, and the likes that not just test capabilities of these systems, but also test compliance to different requirements, right? And of course, that's where standards play an essential role. What should these really be? And then, of course, the question is also how do you, say, bridge the gap between these high-level principles and various ways of building technical evidence for those? So one effort in this space that colleagues at ETH, as well as spin-off that I've co-founded, Latticeflow has been involved in, is Compl-AI. It's sort of a framework that tries to really map these high-level principles down to concrete benchmarks where we can sort of try to provide this kind of technical evidence. And I think a third angle that's really important, right, in establishing trust in this technology is transparency, right? It's really to kind of try to build an understanding of these systems, right, and from scratch. And so that's what we very much try to push in the SysAI initiative, right, with Apertus that we've released, this large open multilingual language model that's fully transparent about not just the weights, but all the data, all the training recipes that's been going into, that's been released by ETH EPFL with many other partners involved. So I think overall, we need a collection of these approaches to really foster trust in this technology. But these are some of the levers we have.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you talk about trust, and of course, we all know, policy and regulation is a key area that we can, of course, work on for trust. But we also know the new geopolitical landscape, and we also know that we are not going to be there. In fact, as a humankind, today we don't even have red lines that we can say that everybody agrees on what we shouldn't be doing, right? Now, I think that's where I'm going to jump and come to maybe standards. And I think what we have heard, and maybe Sylvia, you can talk to us a little bit about it. How are the standards organizations working around it, specifically ISO, which is an international organization, and what is the role and how you can help there? So maybe you share a little bit.
Okay. Thanks, Aisha. Thank you, everyone, and for the invitation here. I'd like to make a hook to what Andreas was saying before, but before getting there, I assume that most of you have heard about ISO, but in order to address this a little bit, what's the role of international standards, I'd like to take a few seconds to understand what's the organization, how we work. It's like the best way of understanding ISO is the international organization that brings together 170 national standards bodies. And why that is crucial? Because every government nominates a standards body in their country to participate in international standards organization. And what those organizations at national level do is to bring technical experts to these global meetings developing the international standards. So, and in the case of AI, in case of ISO, we have 800 of those technical committees, 50,000 experts, all different areas. In the case of AI, we have a committee with approximately 200 people from 65 different countries. So, and most of these people come together and they develop the standards that they agree on a portfolio, roadmap. They think, okay, what are the standards that I need, understanding the evolution of the technology, what are the main challenges that exist, what are, for the industries, for the government to be able to evolve in this area, what are the agreements that are needed on what's the best way of doing something, right? It's like and so they develop a little bit of a roadmap there. And once they start developing those standards, and you have the international standard, the countries can take that international standard and adopt as a national standard. And the governments will refer to the national standard, which is a copy, a translation, as the basis for the regulations in those specific areas. This is in AI, in food safety, in aviation, in healthcare, in all different areas. So we are not creating, in the case at least of ISO, we're not creating something specific for AI here in terms of a system, how we deal with this challenge. Actually, we are replicating here. It's like as agile and fast as possible because we know about the speed of development of the technology here. But there is already a well-established, credible system to bring the trust into many other areas of society where lives of people are at stake, right? And so once the engineers, they need to know, and the regulators and all these different stakeholders, they need to know, okay, how do we do that? And there was a conversation this morning, someone working in education, and saying, well, the difficulty in education is that it's not enough to be good enough, right? It's like actually when you're dealing with education of kids, you need to be sure that the systems are not coming out with outputs that could be dangerous for those children that don't have all the criteria, all that. How do you establish that trust for that, right? It's like so then one thing is to have the international or national standards, but there's a complementarity to that, which is the quality infrastructure, is the conformed assessment. There it starts getting a bit technical, but actually having these other bodies that can certify that whatever is being done or is developed or being deployed is in compliance with a set of standards. And there will never be only an ISO standard. It will always be a combination of multiple standards that are needed for something as complex as a financial system that is AI-enabled or a healthcare system. So you can imagine that these are very different domains of knowledge that requires very many different standards. And so it's not sufficient to have the broad umbrella standards on AI, but you need all the verticals also. It's like how AI then is applied in healthcare, in mobility, in all the different areas. And
yeah, thank you for that, actually, Sylvia. But one question I do have, and as you were speaking, it came to me. What comes first? Is it first regulation and then standards, or is it standards and then regulation? Because when you look at the EU AI Act, it came about, it's like a regulation, and now we have Sensenelec coming up with standards, which are supposed to help us to implement that regulation. what you just talked about was sort of thinking of saying, let's think about something global, which is standards, and then national sort of government bodies will come up with their regulation based on that. So how does this work? Because what would be your view on that?
I'd love to be able to answer your question in a binary way, but you can imagine that it's more complicated. That depends on jurisdiction, right?
Okay.
You mentioned EU.
Yeah.
EU operates in a very different way from, if you think North America, or you have another environment which is China, right? And you have many other countries operate in different ways. And also in AI, even when we say in other domains, also the way you regulate AI, you don't regulate everything on AI, right? Then there's the bias aspect, there's the data aspect, there's the privacy aspects, and the regulation is not all regulations are enacted in a single moment for all the different domains, right? They enact one part of the regulation, then you start working another part, and then another part. It's iterative,
yes.
Thanks.
Yeah.
It's like I think the standards support very much regulators in thinking what's the best way of regulating something. It's like and the way we work with regulators, usually our bodies work, is that leave the technical details for the technical standards. It's like try to keep the regulation at a level where you define the principles, what is needed, how to protect. For example, you say, okay, the AI system needs to be explainable. You stop there. Now, how it is defined explainability, leave that for the technical standards. Because the answer to what is an explainable AI system was different 10 years ago. It's different today, it will be different in 5 years. The regulation cannot evolve that fast, but the technical standards can evolve there. I think that complementarity is very important.
Thank you. I'm going to come to you now, Agata, because I think one of the things that was already mentioned was transparency, and transparency as a way to build trust. And I think just back in our speaker lounge, you were talking about your organization, AI Alliance, and I'd love to hear what it is that you do, I think, for the audience as well, and how does that link to building trust?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you again for the invite, and thanks for the audience for being here. So yeah, I work at IBM Research, but as a lead for Europe in the AI Alliance. AI Alliance was started end of 2023 by IBM, Meta, and many other institutions, private sector, public sector, namely academic institutions, NGOs, enterprises, startups. I think you might even be part of organizations that are part of the AI Alliance. So I urge you to have a look if you haven't checked yet. But so the AI Alliance is this nonprofit organization now that has been founded to build, advocate, and also adopt open source AI and think about how working together, collaborate among members, among institutions really helps to develop technology that can be fruitful for society, can be fruitful for companies, of course, for enterprises to build on the work on each other. And of course here, the question and the point of transparency is fundamental for us. The idea that only by increasing transparency and letting others, assess the work, assess the safety of technology, we can improve and build trust and build technology that can be, bring the good and bring positive outcome and for everyone. And so we really work in this collaborative way. We work at the moment on the front of agentic AI, but we work on the front of data and open models. And so the idea that transparency is really at different levels, and this to say that not everyone needs to push everything in the open source in the sense of like removing barriers to private data, and especially in certain domains where it's very important to keep data private in healthcare, finance, or many other very sensitive environments. But this to say that there must be, and it's possible, we believe, working with so many enterprises and startups and academic institutions like ETH and EPFL, that it's possible to build these initial blocks, right, of like technology that can be then leveraged by others and used to create better solutions altogether. And so we have examples in specific scientific domains where we're working from geospatial to, chemistry, but also working with companies like enterprise that you would not think, like football clubs, for example, that really believe in the power of open source to create solutions that are, deployable in loco, and that means that also the safety and privacy of their own data can be kept there while deploy open source solutions. So I think this brings things together.
That's super. That's fantastic. But just one question that would come to my mind was, if I look today, yes, of course, you're doing amazing work. But then there seems to be some kind of a power imbalance because then you have, let's take the example of the Grok, by Elon Musk and what is going on there. How do you feel that is going? And do you feel today that there is some sort of an imbalance in terms of your voice being heard or what you are doing in a way? And because here we're talking about global collective systems and how we move the needle. Do you think that you are making really the difference, or you feel that there are other players out there, maybe private or so on and so forth, who are basically getting their way?
I think also we should differentiate in the sense that the Alliance really is working towards building open source solutions that can be adopted by enterprises, right? So it's not necessarily AI for consumer, but AI for businesses, AI for institutions like governments and others. So I think the audience and the adopters, right, are different. However, of course, your is a good question of like power imbalances, and I believe the AI Alliance was, I think, started with the assumptions that working together and creating a common shared framework, right, of values, principles, also mission, right? It's important and can balance, can play a role in comparison and to other options that are out there that are closed source and they are behind closed doors.
Yeah. And I mean, I'll pick up on that, on open source, closed, and basically how we can work through that. But before that, I would really like to, of course, bring in Kirk into the discussion as well. So thank you for being here. And the idea would be to really understand what's happening in the private sector. When you look at risks assessment, but also building trust, and of course that's very important for private companies as much as it is for others. What are you really doing, and how do you go about it?
So I can speak to our own company, and here I think we're wearing a couple hats. One, we're an enterprise, global enterprise, like so many others who are really trying to get every one of our team members to critically evaluate the potential of these technologies to improve the way that they do their jobs. We're also, we consume these technologies. We also produce the technology to enable others, and then we finally have people who build their AI outcomes on top of our goods and services. So product, process, and partnership, those are all things that we're evaluating. For us, the catalyst to move, because at the labs we had been saying, I think we had an academic, theoretical relationship with safety in AI for a long time. What catalyzed us to move from contemplation into action was back in 2019, our Global Ethics and Compliance did an exhaustive third-party evaluation of our entire human rights footprint of the company, every aspect of our company. And we got accolades for conflict-free minerals, for being eternally vigilant on forced labor in our supply chain. But the auditor came back and said, the next three things you guys have to worry about is AI, AI, AI. AI in product, AI in process, AI in terms of partnership. And that then caused our Global Ethics and Compliance Office to call us up at the labs and said, we understand AI, how to spell AI, and that's about it. Past that, we need you to partner with us. And so that's what we did. We partnered. I got to lead the team who wrote our responsible AI ethics design principles, started out with a blank slate, wrote at the top our purpose to advance the way people live and work, and then we decided we need our own principles because we wanted to evaluate not just a company, we wanted to evaluate our company, our place in the world. And we came up with 5 principles. AI should be human-focused, AI should be privacy-preserving and secure, AI should be inclusive, AI should be responsible, AI should be robust. The first 3, those are from the lens of the human rights community in our company, and the last two are engineers talking out loud. Now, one of the elements inside of the responsible principle that I made sure was in there, and Andreas, this comes back to the comments that you were making, hazards-based safety engineering is a discipline that's proven.
Yes.
You know, maybe you saw the headlines overnight, the horrible train crash in Spain, and why those are so shocking to us is because they're so rare. And they're so rare because that's an engineered outcome. That is engineering principles and standards coming together to guarantee public safety. And so for us, that was the first thing. We wrote it into our principles that we want every one of our team members to be evaluating this. So I think for us, the first step was to think about our own operations and write these principles so that team members could have a touchstone. Now, we've spent the last 5 years with working groups learning to live up to those potentials and live up to those principles. But the next piece, and you touched on this as well, which is as we think about what the enterprise can do, we will be the ones who consume. We are the ones who are actually going to eventually pay back the investment bankers with interest because of consuming. And that gives us a power. And that power is to go through the cycles of negotiation, litigation, legislations. To your point, they will be vertical by vertical, and they will be jurisdiction by jurisdiction. And yes, that's a complicated, messy problem, but that's actually how we have a vibrant and diverse world. And so we just have to assume that that's the hard problem in front of us. So we can do this. And when I was a brand new engineer at HP 36 years ago, I was taught a formula I repeat to every engineer I meet as they come in our doors today. Quality is fitness for use as defined by the end customer. And what's so critical about that formula is that I cannot declare anything as fit for use myself as an engineer. I have to enter into a dialogue. I have to develop empathy. I think those processes, as we begin to consume these technologies in our jurisdiction, in our verticals, and push back against people that are driving these technologies at us, is part of the way that we will get to safety. And it will absolutely be an iterative process, and it will be a messy process because legislation, litigation, negotiation, and hopefully some innovation too. That will be that iterative process. That's how you solve a three-body problem, is by iteration and approximation. And here, regulator, industry, and hopefully a population that you're trying to make thrive and able to thrive. That's that messy problem. And first thing is to declare the messy problem, but then to use the tools that we have developed already in transportation, in nuclear, in communications, and energy. We know how to do hard things, and this is no different.
No, I think that's fair. But again, I'm going to just ask it. Every single company seems to be coming up with their principles, right? I mean, you go around and you see every single one, and be it sort of the big tech or those that are on the consumption side. And from the outside, it looks like, how do you sort of, when we're looking again at a global collective system, how do I find the common thread?
We do have.
And how do you work with others?
We have a Rosetta Stone, which is, these are our principles. And for us, the touchstone on all of this was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Right? So that was the starting principle. Along with our purpose, everything flows from that. And that makes it a global solution. And so starting from that, that's what we did. But we do have the cheat sheet of, if you're answering a request for proposal from this jurisdiction in this vertical, here's what you're going to see from the customer, and we've been in that conversation. We've already had that dialogue. Here's how you interpret and then cross-reference between our principles. We really believe, and we argued for a year over every single word on that slide. That's what made it authentic to us, and that gives us confidence to project forward from our values into opportunities globally.
Very good. Thank you so much. I want to make this a little bit more concrete now, right? So let's take the example of, I was inspired yesterday by the panel on deepfakes. Deepfakes being something that is obviously impacting us as a society. It's something that is eroding trust. It is something, we don't know anymore what we read, what we see, what we hear, if this is true or not. And even if you do understand, for example, there's, I don't know if you've seen, there is this Sienna Rose, there is a music that is been released and very, very inspiring. And then there's all this debate about, oh, well, this is actually AI generated. And then you start reading, is it or is it not? And even then you don't know if it is or not, because who is the authority on telling me whether it is or whether it is not? So obviously this is bringing more doubt into our world rather than trust into our world. And I would like to understand, first of all, and even when we come to risks, and I come to Andreas, how are we really, give us an example of how you can actually agree on assessing those specific risks, like the red teaming, for example. How does that work? And if you look at, let's say, deep fakes as an example, what is out there in terms of academia that has been looked at, and we can try to make sure that people like me or everybody else over here understands a little bit that I'm looking at something which is deep fake, and if so, who should I be listening to tell me that that's the way it is?
I mean, certainly it's a technical question that's been studied, right? As to what extent one can, say, watermark AI-generated content, right? There's also lots of ways of how these watermarks can be broken, and studies have shown that as well. So, right? So, in a way, whenever it comes to security, there's sort of a cat and mouse game, right? And that's sort of what threat teaming tries to get at. In a way, try to sort of play the attacker's role and see kind of to what extent one can elicit undesirable behavior, problematic behavior from these AI systems in place. An important concept in establishing trust, sort of through these means. I mean, in the end, I think, of course, misuse of technology, right, is also something, right, that can't alone be solved through regulation, right? And I think there needs to be questions of how, one can deal with such potential misuse.
So there's
questions like authenticity, right? Is there ways of maybe not watermarking AI-generated content, but human-generated content, and so on, right? It's done maybe in the photography industry already. Is one potential path that's being explored. I think it's a big topic.
That is a good one. What about the standards? Are you looking at something like that at all? And I know there was a summit recently. Is there anything that came out that could be helpful in that area?
Well, specifically on the authenticity, there is an alliance between ISO, ITU, IC, Adobe, and some other organizations that are actually, it's called AMAS, it's about Alliance for Media Authenticity Standards. But basically bringing together what are all the different standards, but bringing also regulators there. It's like because that is really will be an interplay. It's very clearly between the standards, the evolution of the technology, and the regulators there. Here is one area where the standardization here is very challenging because the technology, it's evolving. It's like this one very tricky area to be standardized. It's like what we are doing is actually creating the dialogue between, okay, how do we create frameworks to try to establish the authenticity together then with industry players and regulators. To the AI International Standards Summit that took place in Korea beginning of December, we brought 300 people that are. So there's a fatigue on AI summits, right? I see everyone knows why the heck should we do another summit? Because we really felt that in terms of international standards for AI, that was not the focus of the discussion. That summit was focused we were talking to ourselves a little bit, right? It's like bringing all the experts, but also regulators, civil society, it's like everyone involved in the ecosystem of standardization for AI. Main outcome there is about the SOE statement for main commitments, principles about the social technical. It's like these areas in others is absolutely crucial that we don't think only about the technology, but the impact of technology in society. It's not only a human, but a systemic on society. The social technical standards here. The other is the human rights. It's like actually we really need to bring a human rights dimension in it. The third is about the multi-stakeholder aspect. It really cannot be only industry-driven. It's like cannot be only private industry standards. We really need that multi-stakeholder. And the fourth is about capacity building, because it's fundamental that we bring the countries, developing countries where those technologies will be deployed, that they have not only a seat at the table, but they are able and equipped and they have the knowledge and the time to engage in those discussions. Those were the four outcomes. It's a social, technical, human rights, capacity building, and I just forgot the other one.
Okay, that's right.
Stakeholders.
Stakeholders,
Thank you very much.
yes.
Yes.
So thanks a lot. Agata, I would like to come to you because, I mean, you're working on open source, right, you said, and there's another discussion which is all the time happening. And again, I'm talking on behalf of the general, people who not necessarily following AI so closely. Open source open models versus closed models. And, in terms of risks, in terms of trust, I mean, where do we stand? Because they're sort of saying, yeah, if it's all open source, I mean, you can really hack it can do lots of bad things. And what would be your experience on that?
Well, of course, by being the AI Alliance and focusing on open source, we are believing that there is a value in doing things in the open. And I think here I would like to a bit debunk a kind of an idea that is still there, especially I would say in some circles of policymakers that are really worried of, like, when they think about open, they think everything is out there and we cannot control, right? But I think there is, on the opposite, it's not really true that when things are closed, are necessarily safe. Mm-hmm. And things can be leaked, can be hacked, as you said, can be accessed even though they're closed. And so our approach is instead thinking, and I would say that the approach of the open source community is that if things are done transparently, they can be safe because you have more eyes on them. Mm-hmm. So you have a community, you build a community of experts, right? Like professors, academics, technology experts, but you have community really technologies that can put their hands around the problems and try to solve them, try to assess them from other perspectives. And it's really a community effort. It's not one-sided. And sometimes solutions also to the problem that you were raising about deepfakes can be addressed by a community, by others that look at the same problem and see it and assess it from a different perspective. And so also to go back to the point of like not having only one stakeholder at the table, but bring a diversity of stakeholders. That's also why the AI Alliance is open to a diversity of stakeholders, to bring a diversity of visions, a diversity of voices, in terms also of locations worldwide, right? Because things are addressed potentially in different ways.
Thank you. I would actually like to now move to you, Ashikar. I was just wondering, in terms of, again, industry, and again, there is a big role, we understand, of industry in how you can really mitigate some of the risks through technical solutions that you're. Do you have an example, for example, that you can share of anything from your amazing career that you've had, where you would say, look, this was a risk, and we as an industry came up with some solution, which is then, because of course what we are interested in, such solutions that can then be scaled and that can be copied by others. And is that something a private industry does, or is it something you keep for yourself?
Well, I guess there's two things. I will channel my inner Andy Grove, former CEO of Intel, who said that volume begets standard, not the other way around. And so just understanding where the market is and focusing on that might be a guidepost. But so much about what we've just talked about here is the challenge of attestation and provenance. And how can I tell that I would love to have continuous attestation from the sensor that captured the data, from the CCD that captures the image to the LCD that displays the image. Do I have the ability to create an unbroken chain of attestations? And let's just remember recent attacks. The XZ compression library attack on open source, a deep technical and social engineering attack by a very sophisticated and long play by an adversary. We also think of the pager attack on a supply chain, right? That was devastating in its results. We have very sophisticated adversaries who are increasingly pushing back farther in the supply chain. So that question of attestation, how can I tell? It's no longer, we're probably all smart enough not to just randomly connect our phones to a Wi-Fi hotspot that says, free Wi-Fi. But we put two components down on a circuit board and connect them with a copper wire and start running our private data through them. That is no longer a sufficient level of robustness. So understanding how we work through standards to figure out, okay, what do I need to do in terms of attestation? How can I eventually get back, and the technical word of the day will be a physically unclonable function, something that, thank you, quantum mechanics, gives me something that is non-forgeable that I can anchor, but then I have to understand how to use that anchor and chain it through each each of the components, whether that component is hardware, software, firmware. Now we get to the problem of scale. Can I do that when we're going to have, 8 billion people and 100,000 inferences per hour for each of 8 billion? Can we actually scale that attestation? Now, to your point, we'll probably have to choose the most sensitive verticals first in order to understand how we scale that technology. But eventually, that might be what we have to do, because we talk about trust, and unfortunately, it's a word that I've learned to be untrusting of, because even the most trustworthy individual can be coerced. Systems break, they can be, and so when we need to get to is proof. And proof is in the mathematical sense. A mechanical set of operations, an algorithm I go through, and I get the answer back. Is this true or is this false? Now, can we actually engineer systems that do that at scale for all the interactions that we want to have? That is incredible research opportunity.
Fantastic. Great. So I think coming back to what you just talked about, we talked about scale, but I think I would love to talk about collaboration as well, because again, to arrive to that global safety, we need to collaborate. And just before I go to the panelists here, I'd just like to say we will be opening for questions. If you have any, please prepare already in a few minutes. The question I would have for each of you, and I think we can start with yourself actually. How is collaboration working? Let's assume you have something which is a great solution now. How would the industry collaborate with each other? And I think that would be the same then for Silvio, for the international organizations, for academia as well. And I know, Andreas, you're also sitting at the UN sort of high advisory panel. Maybe there is something out there as well, and for you too. So very quickly, how is collaboration working between industry, private players today? And how does that move the needle forward with regards to global safety?
And I think it's a mixture, right?
Okay.
We have the traditional standard, we have the IEEE, we have ISO, we have these international standards, IEC, and yet we also have consortiums that form. We have communities of self-interest, and again, driven by vertical, driven by opportunity. I think that's where you see, and for me, that's positive, because that is an end-use community voicing what they need to have happen for something to be a useful, a utile solution. How do I demonstrate fitness for use? Well, I have to talk to the customer. So if those communities of practice can come together and declare what they need, then I think that's the first step to soliciting engineered solutions that fit.
Okay. Now, I'm going to say something which is probably not, I'll come to you, Silvio, and maybe I mentioned that already to you. How is, given the new geopolitics and United States, EU, and having different views when it comes to standards, are you seeing a divergence with regards to where, maybe NIST versus CENELEC or ISO? Are you seeing convergence? And how is the international community working together in light of this sort of geopolitical divergence that we're seeing?
So we do see that at national or regional level, there are initiatives that are there's that interplay with regulations, and so there is a political dimension when you think about developing national or regional standards. It's like that they need to somehow enable what the policymakers, regulators want to achieve. So then it's natural that you have that verticality at national and regional level. In our case, we do not see any weakening of the collaboration at international level. We continue having a very strong relationship and the collaboration of the European experts in the technical communities, as well as the North Americans and the Chinese and from everywhere. It's like thanks to this structure that we have of the national standards body. In the case of the US, we have the ANSI, American National Standards Institute, that they engage the NIST and the other ASTM, IEEE, the other US-based SDOs into that system, bring the experts to the discussions at international level. The same happens at CENELEC in Europe with China and others. So I do think that both levels, they complement each other, and it's not necessarily negative. And I think they have the national and regional standards have a role to play in supporting those specific regulations. And then the international standards about creating that common ground that can be deployed more internationally.
Well, that's reassuring. What about you, Andreas? How about the academic community, and how about sort of, also maybe to draw upon your, UN experience?
Yeah, so I think in academia, I think it's definitely of the realms where collaboration is still very actively pushed and engaged in, right? So I think it's an exciting space where this can still really happen through various platforms. Also, for example, the initiative we run here is with AI and so on, really that involves partners from many different countries and so on. So I think that is definitely a space where I think collaboration is held high, where to really push forward the light for humanity. When it comes to the UN, just a bit of context for this high-level advisory body, right? So it was convened by the Secretary General in 23, in light of the fact that a lot of countries, especially in the Global South, didn't really have a voice in any of the dialogues for AI governance, say in the OECD, G7, G20, Hiroshima process, and the likes, right? And so was given a mandate that has now concluded, right, to advance recommendations regarding global governance of AI. It fed recommendations into the Global Digital Compact that was negotiated by the member states, and several of the recommendations have now been taken forward, right? So there is now an international AI panel that is going to be instituted to really do horizon scanning of some of the emerging risks, but also opportunities for AI for sustainable development. There's a global dialogue on governance that's been instituted. I think these are two examples. A large focus of that board was really also to view AI as a positive factor to drive forward sustainable development and explore questions of collaboration around capacity building. And that's also very much kind of inspiring efforts like ICANE, for example, right, that evolve, that build on capacities that we have around here, but embracing partners like Data Science Africa, the ICRC, to really see what one can do, build on models like Apparatus and others, right, to really advance applications for the global good.
Okay. Well, Agata, I mean, you by definition are, of course, working and collaborating, but my question there would be more on resources. I mean, do you feel today that you have the right resources that allow you to basically work in a way where it is really moving the needle forward?
Yeah, so as you said, like it's part of the idea of the Alliance being a collaborative organization, and the idea behind it is really that the open source community is everywhere, like across the national borders, right? And people collaborate beyond what is their, location, let's say. And definitely different organizations, different institutions bring into the mix their either expertise, their compute, their knowledge, their engineering talents, their data, their resources. So it's really the idea of like each of them bringing something to the table, and with the goal of building, of deploying, of adopting something that is bigger and better than what each of the different parties could do by themselves, right? So there is this idea. And the other point that I would mention is that really in the collaboration, in the creating community, right, is where we can push AI for the good of the many and not the good of the few. And so we really believe in that. We have activities with academic institutions like and supporting Apparatus, but also other across the world really that believe in this mission, because it's what I think could be the moving needle. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And just one thing, and I'm going to open to questions right after that. With regards to inclusion and with regards to making sure that, and you talked about socio-technical standards, one of the things, which is good for us to understand, who is really participating in these standard-making bodies? Do you today have experts outside of, basically very technical experts, people in philosophy, people in civil rights, that are actually part of creating some of these standards? And just very quickly, and then I'm opening to questions.
Yes, absolutely. It's like what happens is that you do have a predominance of industry, because let's take Germany. It's like you have one German government and you have 50 German companies active in AI, right? So it's natural that you end up having, but what happens, if I still take in Germany, it's like we have several NGOs and the think tanks, academia, that are nominated by our dean at the national standards body to participate, to represent Germany in the international study. It's like there is, in the case of ISO, it's a very strong focus for us. It's like there are KPIs we measure. We are on the back of our managers of the committees that they need to have that diversity of stakeholders. Otherwise, we lose our legitimacy. It's like for us, it's so crucial.
Yes.
It's like ISO standards will not be credible if they don't have that multi-stakeholders. It's like it's absolutely crucial.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for clarifying that. I'll now open the floor for questions. Do we have any? Right? Wow. Okay, we'll start with the lady over there.
Thank you, Silvio. Yes, thank you, Silvio, for commenting on the difference between AI regulation and standards. You mentioned the example of explainability. Yes, regulation says it needs to be explainable. Standards gives a different points here. My question to Andreas would be, where do you see this whole thing going? I mean, the ISHKA Award, one of the ISHKA Awards last year went to Cinder Rudin, who said, up to now, I have not seen application that cannot be made fully transparent, where we need a black box model. What is your view on that? Will AI in so many years be fully transparent, fully explainable?
Yeah, so are we fully explainable? Right, so when humans make decisions, there's all sorts of neurological processes going on, right, that we don't fully understand, right? And so they're certainly not fully rationalizable. So in some sense, we all are dealing with decisions that are based on black box models, right, that we all carry around. So in a way, we're used to that, right? But it's a question of kind of how do we go forward in our society to, in a way, have the right form of interaction, right form of communication between machines and humans, right, and really use them as the powerful tools that they can be, but hopefully for the good of society. And the question is, how do we architect that?
And any timeline?
I think timelines in AI, yeah, so very hard to predict.
Yeah.
I think it's an important topic to really think about what's the right way of this interface, but needs to have sufficient priority, right, and will happen.
Thank you.
Who next? The gentleman, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, this is Shiva. So I have one question. So can AI influence or help the ISO regulators' mindset? Will they influence in setting the standards based upon the geopolitical situations and as it vary from country to country with the past data we have? So will ISO regulators use that information from AI?
I have to apologize. I did not understand the question.
Is it about how AI can influence standards organizations?
Yes.
As a tool to help them?
As a tool, as a regulator to make a decision.
The use of AI for your work, basically.
I'd say very limited impact, because at the end of the day, it's like the way you develop standards, you have 10 people sitting around the table and negotiating what should be written in those clauses. Actually, it's a very human process. It's like the people negotiate, discussing, they discuss every comma, every word. Now, AI supports then in doing their preparatory work. It's like all that work on the back, it does support. It's like as enhancing the experts who are participating. But the development of the standard, it's an intrinsically human process where people are negotiating, bringing their input to defending their interests also, right? It's like because you have the different values, interests, that is a negotiating process, right? I don't know whether...
I know personally, having the first time I went into it, and this was just a telecom standards body, and I went in thinking we're all just there to make better stuff, and I was disabused of that notion in about 10 seconds because I have never met a deeper set of political operatives than those people, and I realized everyone is at that table. Because this was an industry standard, so everyone at that table was the paid employee of an enterprise, and they were there to protect the interests of the enterprise. And if their enterprise was making a really expensive little piece of a solution that they had the patent to, then the only thing they cared about was making sure that was still there. And if innovation and advancement were the cost of business, then that's what they were there for. So it's just realize when people are negotiating, they are negotiating to protect their interests. And if we don't have common interests, then you will not have you will end up having a challenging conversation, and someone will win.
No, and that is exactly why we need diversity in basically the groups. And that is where my question was as well, because everybody is going to be going for their interests. And essentially, so good to know that we are having that in some of these discussions. Next, here, yeah.
Thank you. My question is also for Silvio. I'm part of the Sense Analytic JTC 21 Working Group 4 committee.
Oh, sorry, I hope I didn't say anything wrong. I'm in trouble.
Not at all. But my question, going back to Aisha's observation, whether it comes first the regulation or the standards, the European standards have a particular mission to guarantee presumption of conformity to the UAI Act. So they are a bit of a different animal with respect to other ISO standards. On the other side, I am a big fan, for example, of ISO 42001 as a first step to undertake when starting an AI governance program in your organization. But there's been a lot of talking of a tension between ISO 42001 and European standard, whereas I never saw that, because in that standard in particular, it says that you need to be conform to the applicable regulation in your legislation. So, and on the other side, there are also a lot of vendors try to sell ISO 42001 as a tool for compliance to the UAI Act, right? So what can be done more by standard bodies to avoid this kind of tension? And do you see a role on assurance organization and certifying bodies to ensure that these standards are well understood and applied in context?
I think the standards is one piece of the quality infrastructure that we talk about, right? It's like and all the conformity assessment, accreditation bodies, lots of acronyms, like, but and the regulators is working as an ecosystem there. It's like ISO has a privileged position, but also a responsibility in terms of being a very visible organization that all these different other entities are part of the work that we do. So therefore, we have a strong convening capacity there. But we need to be very humble that it's like we bring the people together. We are not the ones who will set that agenda. It's very important that actually we move collectively. Actually, what you mentioned to me, I appreciate, because actually it's something that we will pay more attention to that. Thanks. We will think about that and discuss with the team. Thank you.
Any other questions? Let's take somebody in the back, the gentleman in the back, all the way, yeah? Yeah? Yes?
Hi there, everyone. Douglas Erickson from Project ZOA. Thank you for the talk so far. My question is surrounding the safety frameworks are usually aimed at the human-AI relationship or the effect of humans. But I wanted to ask if you're aware of any solid developed frameworks being put in place for the ecology side of things, where AI takes into account the relationships between humans and animals.
Relationship between human and animals. Is anybody looking at that? Somebody in the audience.
I think it's for us,
yeah.
you know, part of our responsible principle, and it was funny because when we wrote these back in 2019, we were fretting because training an AI model uses the same energy as 5 internal combustion engine vehicles, and now you think about that, it's like, oh, how quaint, right? Because now we're talking about gigawatt AI factories, and you know, just so everyone, I always have to have a mental model. A gigawatt AI factory puts one factory in competition with 833,000 average U.S. homes, and U.S. homes use more energy than a lot of other homes in the world. So thinking about holding people accountable for the resources that are consumed and trying to understand that all the way back to the data collection, all the way through training, all the way especially through inference, because training happens occasionally, inference happens continuously. So thinking about all of those impacts, can you give me the total sum impact of achieving a particular AI outcome? And if you can't, then I think that we need to have a deeper conversation.
Sylvie, did you have something to add?
Yeah, we do have a technical group that is looking at AI and sustainability, both sides. It's sustainability of AI systems, the whole energy, the whole aspect, and materials, and the impact of AI in advancing the agenda, sustainability agendas in its multiple dimensions.
2 more minutes.
Climate is one visible, but biodiversity and this whole area is another one. We do have those liaisons, and we have a group of people working on that.
Great. We've got 2 minutes left, so I wonder if we can add something here, or then we
just
wrap
very
it up.
quickly, like that, of course, in the open source space, right? The idea behind it is also that we don't waste resources and we don't start from scratch every time, building new technology, building new tools, building new frameworks, right? And we build on the work of each other. Not directly necessarily in the relation human-animals, but human environments, broadly speaking, right? So it's an ecosystem of competencies and of technology, really, that is built and built on the effort of others. And really, I think that the effort of some organizations, such as the AI Alliance, is to coordinate such effort, because in the open source, you have a lot of very interesting pushes, right, and very interesting ideas, but get very scattered and very hard to find sometimes. And so you need some sort of coordination and governance of these opportunities, really, and all these efforts. So, yeah.
Any last words, Andreas, to add?
I could add to the topic. So there certainly has been a lot of work on AI and data science applied to sustainability, right, and also ecological questions, right? So reserve design and so, for example, right, various types of optimization problems. There's been a large NSF expedition over many years in the US looking at these types of questions. So it's definitely a use case, I think, that maybe should get more attention, be pushed more.
So in the spirit of Swiss timing, I have been told that I have to stop this panel. Just to say that, you know, it is, my last word would be, we need to stay positive. It is something that will need our collective input. And I think we all have a role to play in this debate. And the answers are not out there, but certainly a lot of work being done. So thank you so much to our brilliant panelists. And it was such a pleasure to be here. Thank you.